U.S. Senator Kamala Harris launches her campaign for president at a rally in her hometown of Oakland, California, on January 27. Reuters. Elijah Novellage, who is Kamala Harris' current job, U.S. Senator from California, running for President of the United States as a Democratic candidate. Age, 54. Family. Harris is married to lawyer Douglas Emhoff. Hometown, Oakland, California. Political party, Democratic. Previous jobs, Attorney General of California from 2011 to 2017. San Francisco District Attorney from 2004 to 2011. Who is Kamala Harris's direct competition for the nomination? Based on a recurring series of national surveys we conduct, we can figure out who the other candidates competing in Kamala Harris's lane are, and who the broader opponents are within the party. Former VP Joe Biden. Biden is a strong candidate overall, and roughly 70% of likely Democratic voters who would be satisfied with Kamala Harris as nominee would also be satisfied with Joe Biden as the nominee. Not only is that quite high, it's several points higher than the general percentage of Democrats satisfied with Joe Biden as the nominee. That means Harris voters are predisposed towards the former vice president, and they'll be competing for many of the same voters. Business Insider said. Elizabeth Warren. While the percentage of Democrats said they would be satisfied with Warren as nominee is in the mid-40s, the percentage of Harris fans who would be satisfied with the senator from Massachusetts atop the ticket is nearing 60%. That more than 10 percentage point bump is the largest of any other candidate, meaning that the two will be competing early for many of the same voters. Sen. Cory Booker. While many of Harris's fellow senators overlap with her considerably, only Warren and Booker see broader support among Harris voters specifically than Democrats as a whole. While Harris fans were, for instance, less likely to favor Sen. Amy Klobuchar. Than your typical half of Harris voters would also be satisfied with Booker as nominee, teeing up an early rivalry. Insider has been conducting a recurring poll through SurveyMonkey audience on a national sample to find out how different candidates' constituencies overlap. We ask people whether they are familiar with a candidate, whether they would be satisfied or unsatisfied with that candidate as nominee, and sometimes we also ask whether they think that person would win or lose in a general election against President Donald Trump. Read more about how we're polling this here. What are Kamala Harris's policy positions? On healthcare, Harris supports Sen. Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, which would provide every American with health insurance through Medicare while eliminating private insurers and virtually eliminating co-pays and deductibles. She has also said she'd be open to a public option, rather than a single-payer system. Harris has introduced legislation to expand mental health care and to reduce racial disparities in maternal mortality. In July 2019, Harris laid out her proposal to allow the federal government set prices for certain prescription medications in order to lower drug costs for American patients. In August 2019, Harris disavowed her support of the Sanders Medicare for All bill, which she had co-sponsored for 2 years, saying she was not comfortable with it. She's also laid out her healthcare plan, a form of Medicare for All, which maintains a large role for private insurers while expanding the program to cover more Americans. It has a 10-year phase-in period. At July's Democratic debate in Detroit, she defended her plan against on-stage rivals. She said that after talking to experts, families and stakeholders, that I came away with as a very clear understanding that I needed to create a plan that was responsive to the needs of the American people, responsive to their needs of understanding that insurance companies have been jacking up the prices for far too long. On immigration, Harris wants to re-examine and potentially overhaul the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE. But while serving as San Francisco's DA, she supported a city policy that turned undocumented immigrant minors over twice if they were arrested or believed to have committed a felony. Harris supports the Obama administration's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals (DACA) program, which protects young people who come to the U.S. illegally as children. Harris co-sponsored the Reunite Act to reunify separated migrant families, and has introduced legislation to increase oversight at immigrant detention centers and end the construction of new facilities. She's also introduced a bill that would limit ICE's ability to take actions harmful to unaccompanied migrant children. She opposes Trump's border wall, which she's called a medieval vanity project, on climate change. In February 2019, Harris signed on to the Green New Deal resolution, which aims to transition the U.S. to 100% clean and renewable energy in 10 years, and stimulate the economy with millions of new jobs and an expanded social safety net. As Attorney General, she investigated whether ExxonMobil lied about its research on climate change. She has a 100% lifetime score, based on her voting record, from the League of Conservation Voters, on campaign finance. Like a growing number of Democrats, Harris no longer takes donations from corporate political action committees. As of April 2018, nearly 65% of Harris's campaign funding between 2015 and 2018 came from individual donors who gave more than $200, according to Open Secrets, a project of the Center for Responsive Politics. Just under 5% has come from corporate PACs. On abortion, Harris supports the right to an abortion and voted against a bill in the Senate that would ban abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. Harris grilled Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh on his position on abortion during his 2018 confirmation hearing. In May 2019, Harris proposed requiring states that have attempted to restrict abortion rights to receive approval from the Justice Department before they implement new abortion-related laws. On LGBTQ rights, Harris supports legalized same-sex marriage and did not defend California's law that prohibited gay marriage while she was the state's Attorney General. She supported transgender individuals' right to use the bathroom of their choice during her time as Attorney General. But she requested that the government not move forward with providing a prison inmate a gender reassignment surgery. As DA, she created a hate crimes unit to prosecute crimes against LGBTQ youth. On education, Harris has signed on to Sen. Bernie Sanders' College for All Act, which would waive tuition for all students attending public colleges and universities whose families make $125,000 a year or less. She supports expanding some early childhood education programs and implementing national universal pre-kindergarten. In her first major campaign policy proposal, Harris put forth a plan in March 2019 to dramatically raise teacher pay across the country, giving the average teacher a $13,500 salary boost. The plan would cost $300 billion over a decade. On guns. On criminal justice reform, Harris introduced the 2018 Access to Counsel Act, which would guarantee detained migrants access to an attorney. She co-sponsored the 2018 Marijuana Justice Act, which would end the federal prohibition on marijuana. She supports clearing nonviolent marijuana-related charges from individuals' records. Harris supports a moratorium on the death penalty under federal law, calling executions immoral, discriminatory, ineffective, and a gross misuse of taxpayer dollars. But as president, Harris would have no authority over the vast majority of executions, which are carried out by states. Harris introduced a bill to encourage states to reform or replace their cash bail system. She also co-sponsored a federal anti-lynching bill that passed the Senate in 2018. Some of the most impactful and controversial actions Harris took as a district attorney and attorney general. Her past. The California came under attack at the July Democratic primary debate for her past as California attorney general. She defended her role, saying, "I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of the state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. I am proud of that work." On trade, Harris opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump withdrew the U.S. from in 2017, arguing that the deal wasn't transparent and would have hurt California's environmental protection efforts. Harris is opposed to Trump's trade war with China and his tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from the EU, Canada, and Mexico. But she has accused China of engaging in unfair industrial policies and outright theft of American intellectual property. On foreign policy, she supports a political solution to the war in Afghanistan and wants to end U.S. military involvement in the country. She voted against a Senate resolution condemning Trump's withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. She opposed Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. She is opposed to U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen because Congress never approved American involvement in the conflict. Harris is a strong supporter of the Israeli government's close ties to the U.S., calling the bond between the two countries unbreakable. She told a 2017 gathering of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee that she would do everything in my power to ensure broad and bipartisan support for Israel's security and right to self-defense. On taxes, Harris has introduced her Lift the Middle Class Act, which would give a $3,000 refundable tax credit to individuals making $50,000 or less, and a $6,000 credit to couples making $100,000 or less. She would get rid of some cuts in Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to help pay for it. The plan would cost $2.8 trillion over a decade. She criticized the GOP tax cuts of 2017 as a middle-class tax hike to line the pockets of already wealthy corporations and the 1%. On housing, in July 2019, Harris proposed providing up to 4 million black families whose neighborhoods have historically been redlined or discriminated against, with up to $25,000 to help them buy a home. What are Kamala Harris's political successes? How much money has Kamala Harris raised? Harris raised $1.5 million from 38,000 online donors in the 24 hours after she announced her presidential bid in late January. The average contribution was $37. Harris's campaign raised $12 million in the first quarter of 2019 and $11.8 million from 279,000 in the second quarter. Could Kamala Harris beat President Trump? Referring back to Insider's recurring poll, Kamala Harris overall is believed to be a stronger candidate in a general election against Donald Trump than your typical Democrat. While it's still quite early and many remain unsure about the general election, about 2 in 5 voting Democrats think Harris would win in the general election, while about 3 in 10 think she would lose. That is better than the average Democratic nominee according to Insider's survey. Among all respondents, Harris is on par with your typical Democrat. How is Kamala Harris viewed by voters compared to the competition? Insider has conducted a number of other polls to check in on how these candidates are perceived in comparison to one another. When we asked respondents to one poll to rank how far to the left or to the right they considered the candidates, Harris was generally considered to be one of the most left-leaning candidates in the field, somewhat in contrast to her prosecutorial history but plausibly owing to a push from her campaign to appeal to left-leaning voters. Harris was among the more experienced candidates in the field when we asked respondents to rank the candidates based on how prepared they are for the rigors of the presidency given what they knew about their history of public service and experience with government. And when asked how likable or personable respondents perceived the candidates to be, Harris was in the top 5. How do Democratic voters feel about Kamala Harris' qualifications? Insider has conducted polling about how voters feel about candidate attributes or qualifications. We asked respondents about a list of possible qualifications and if they made them more likely or less likely to vote for a candidate for president. For example, among respondents who said they'd vote in the Democratic primary, 19% said a candidate being a college professor made them likelier to support them, while 4% said it made them less likely to, for a 15% net favorability. We can then see how different candidates' resumes stack up compared to those preferences. Attributes perceived as most valuable include her released tax returns, 43%, position in the Senate, 40%, status as a child of immigrants, 21%, and past as an attorney general, 13%, district attorney, 7%, and lawyer, 3%. Attributes considered to be a liability based on the preferences of self-reported Democratic voters include her history as a prosecutor, -1%, and that she grew up wealthy, -42%. Read more of our best stories on Kamala Harris. Let's block ads. Why?